Welcome everybody to Lesson 1 in Inkscape Drawing. For Lesson 1, we are going to focus for a little bit on what Inkscape is and how Inkscape works, and especially compared to other programs like Photoshop. I think it's important to get a little bit of theory under your belt before you start using a program, and then as you use the program, that theory will begin to take on more relevance. The terms I'm going to be using today might be a little vague. They might even be hard to understand, but I'm going to try to explain them both verbally and visually. And as we start using Inkscape, I think it will become more apparent what it is I'm talking about in today's lesson. But you got to start somewhere. And in my opinion, it's never a bad idea to have an understanding of what the program does. Then we can figure out how we can use it to the best of our ability. So let's start by talking about Inkscape versus Photoshop. Inkscape is what is known as a vector-based drawing program, and Photoshop is what is known as a pixel-based drawing program. Well, let's define those terms for a moment, shall we? Let's go in and take a peek at what a pixel-based drawing program and what a vector-based drawing program actually do. So I'm going to jump real quick to this web page, and I'm just going to read you some definitions, and then I'm going to show you what they actually mean. What are pixels? Well, Photoshop, which we will study in class, uses small squares of color to make up all of its images. These are known as pixels. Pixels are the smallest unit in any digital or electronic visual medium. Your television is made up of pixels. Your computer screen is made up of pixels. And Photoshop draws by creating these small pixel units made up of a single color that, when blended together, allow your brain to see an image. The definition says the smallest unit of every pixel graphic are picture elements. And those words, picture elements, were shortened down to the word pixel. Each of these units is assigned a special color value, as these computer graphics are composed of square-shaped pixels. They are arranged in grids, and they are sometimes also referred to as raster graphics. So Photoshop and every other pixel-based drawing program actually draws by creating little tiny squares of color and then arranging them in a manner that your brain, when you zoom out, can actually picture or understand the image. That's different from vector-based drawing programs. Vector-based drawing programs, unlike pixel graphics, aren't composed of tiny little squares of color or picture elements, but rather they are made up of geometric primitives. Another word for that would just be geometric shapes, squares, circles, curves. Okay? They are defined through parameters such as where does the line begin, where does the line end, what's the radius, what's the edge like, what's the line thickness or width, what are the colors, and what are those lines then filled with in terms of color patterns. Well, I could certainly go on and on talking about this, but you know what? It's probably going to be far easier for me to show it to you. So let me jump quickly to this web page. What's the difference between painting with pixels versus drawing with vectors? Well, painting with pixels is very much like taking a paintbrush, dipping it in paint, and then rubbing those pigments onto a canvas. The way the woman in the far left image is painting the color blue onto the wall. Painting with pixels, or Photoshop, is like actually spreading pigment color on a canvas. Whereas drawing with vectors, the woman over on the right side, is when you're actually building a geometric shape or primitive and filling it with color. So the P on the left in the word painting has got all bunches of little bits of color, all arranged in a manner that makes sense to you. It looks like the letter P. Whereas the D in the word drawing on the right side is actually a shape that's also recognized. We said that pixels are little squares of color. Well, take a look at the V and the S, the verses on the left, and notice how the V and the S is made up of little squares of black, gray, or white. Okay, that's how Photoshop creates images. little squares of varying colors. In this case, black, gray, and white. But vector-based drawing programs actually create a geometric shape that looks like a letter V and a letter S. So they're much, much more clear, and we can zoom in, zoom out, we can scale them up and scale them down, change their size, and not lose quality. Photoshop images lose quality when we zoom in or we expand them. Vector-based images don't. And that's one of the strengths of vector-based images, and that's why I teach it to you. Vector-based drawings are what is going to be required anytime you deal with a printer who is going to create for you sports jerseys, posters, logos, t-shirts, baseball caps, because all the graphics you create need to be resized and made bigger or smaller depending on where they're going. If your logo's going on the front of a baseball cap, it's going to be smaller than if it's going on a poster that hangs on the entire wall of your locker room. And being able to make those images larger and smaller without losing any quality is the strength of vector-based drawing programs. And that's why anytime you deal with a printer, they're going to want a vector-based image because they need to resize it. Is it going to go on the pocket of a shirt as a logo, or is it going to be on the wall of your locker room 10 feet tall? Is it going to go on the front of your baseball cap, or is it going to go on the back of a t-shirt and be 7 or 8, 9, 10 times bigger? Okay, vector-based drawing programs give you the ability to change size without losing any quality. So take a look at the left. The left is a pixel-based image. Each of those little colors is created in pixel form. But on the right, it is a vector-based image, and each of those areas of color is a geometric shape. Let me show it to you in another way real quick. There's a very famous painting that hangs in the Chicago Museum of Art, and it's called Sunday in the Park. Sunday in the Park was painted by an artist named George Seurat, and George Seurat was an artist during a period of art known as the Pointillist movement. What Pointillism did was it said, hey, rather than brush color onto a canvas in broad strokes, what these artists wanted to do is dot every color individually by taking the tip of a thin paintbrush and just touching the canvas. Look as I zoom in. As I zoom in, you will see that this image is not made up of brush strokes rubbing the paintbrush across the canvas. It's made up of the artist taking a very thin brush and putting dots of color. There's a dark dot of purple. Right beside it is a light dot of purple. Right beside that is a slightly in-between dot of purple. Here is a dot of dark green. Then there's a dot of light green. Then there's a dot of medium green. This is a very painstaking, slow process. The artists wanted to see how the images looked and how they looked different from when they used brush strokes. This entire painting is made up of dots of color. And it's only when you step back and take a look at the picture as a whole that your brain is able to understand, well, that's a little girl in a white dress wearing a hat. Well, that's a woman in a red top and a pinkish skirt with an umbrella. That's a tree. Those are clearly supposed to be the tree leaves. That's water. That's a sailboat. That's the sky. That's the cloud. That's the grass. That's a dog. That's a monkey, whatever a monkey is doing. So, Pointillism, the style of art where instead of brushing the canvas we use small dots of color, is very similar to what Photoshop does with its pixel-based drawing. Photoshop creates these squares of color. Remember? Squares of color like in the V and the S. And it is only when you back away from that that it stops looking blurry. Whereas InkScape, or vector-based drawing programs, will actually create a geometric shape or primitive and fill it with color. And this will make more sense as you start using it. So those are the differences in what you see, pixel-based versus geometric shapes. Okay? That light blue right there in the hat is actually a geometric shape that you drew and colored light blue. Then the rest of the blue is a second geometric shape that you colored and filled with light blue. And then the dark blue up there in the corner is a third geometric shape that is created and filled with dark blue. And then to give it some three-dimensionality, there's even a black similar shape placed underneath all three. I know this is a little odd, a little vague, but it will make more sense soon enough. So when you paint with pixels, you are actually painting little squares of color, right? There's dark black, there's lighter black, there's gray, there's grayish white, and there's white. And each of those little squares is individual, can be manipulated individually, and make up the image that you're staring at. Whereas in a vector-based drawing program, that is one geometric shape. It's a big kind of lopsided oval filled with black color, and it's one solid object. And I think this is going to be very important for you to understand as we go in and we start using Inkscape to build images. Right? The image on this side is a vector-based drawing program trying to look photorealistic. And we don't look photorealistic in vector. We look much better in vector when we do illustrations. Right? Look at how the rose or the flower on the left and the right in illustration mode, because it's made up of geometric shapes, looks so much nicer than trying to do a photorealistic vector image. If you want photorealism, let's use Photoshop and let's use pixels. If you want some gorgeous illustration images, then we're going to use vector-based drawing programs, either as solid objects with one color or as solid objects with a gradient of colors. Look at the gorgeous gradient or change in color on this leaf, petal, excuse me. Pink at the top, a lighter yellowish pink at the bottom. Even the green of the leaves here have a slight color change. So that's what we're going to be doing in Inkscape. We're going to be learning how to draw things in vector-based style, and that is going to allow us to have control over our illustrations and create them probably better than you think you can. I know some of you are saying, "Sir, I'm not an artist, I can't draw." Well, that's the beauty of any drawing program, is they have ways of making you a better artist than you thought you were. And we are going to play around with that concept in Inkscape to make you a better graphic illustrator than you thought you could be. And then we'll play around in Photoshop a little bit later on in this quadmester, and we're going to make you deal with photorealistic images and show you how to manipulate and work with and change those. So this is just a little bit of background to help you understand the difference between pixel-based images and vector-based images. And we're going to start with vector-based images in Inkscape, and we are going to manipulate them and move them and zoom in and zoom out, and you're going to see the benefits of being able to draw with vectors. All right, that is just some theory to begin lesson 1. In lesson 2, we will actually jump into the program and do some drawing.